Well, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Chairman. You have set the scene well, and I'm not sure if they're deliberately putting these on us to sweat it out of us, but it's hot up here, and I gather it will get hotter. Although I understand that some of you stalwarts go bathing at 8 o'clock in the morning. I want to know who does that. Hands up. So it's a lie. Oh, we have some who do. I wish I'd joined you, because it probably, I think Joe Mulholland goes bathing at 8 in the morning. If I'm here next year, I'll join you. And maybe there will be less uncertainty. I'm not going to go over the points that have been put to us in the introduction here, but I suppose it's fair to say that the unthinkable has happened, which is why I've torn up my script. And I think a lot of us are going to have to tear up the things that we think are real because they're not real and they're not happening. And many of the points that have been raised in the introduction to this session, while we have heard one perspective, can be argued clearly and sometimes rather effectively and with great emotion from the other perspective. So I want to talk to you about where we're at now, since we've had the Brexit vote to leave, where the United Kingdom will opt out. I think we'd be having this conversation even if they'd voted to stay. I think if the margin was narrow for Remain, we would still have this big question about the future of the European Union. I think we now have two questions. We have a question about the future of the United Kingdom, and we also have a question about the future of the European Union itself. And you've put two stark proposals, one disintegration and the other revival, and I'll come to those points. On the issue of the why did it happen in the United Kingdom? I have to say that when I heard Boris Johnson's final television plea to voters, I knew it was over. Because the emotional appeal of regain control, be independent again, sovereign, free, etc., really does resonate, not just in the United Kingdom, but particularly in the United Kingdom, although in some ways I was quite struck by the language, was almost the language of an Ireland wanting to be free, independent and sovereign in historical terms. So I think that plea worked extraordinarily well. But also there are many members of the European Parliament who have spent their entire political careers, and that is their want, if you like, singularly looking to pull Europe apart, but particularly in the first step to pull the United Kingdom out of the European Union. And I think if I spent my entire political career doing one thing only, you're quite focused and you know where the shifts are. Into that, add the uncertainties in all of our lives. The big geopolitical issues have been addressed. Turkey wasn't mentioned, and I think the Turkish crisis is a really big challenge for the European Union now, and I think we have to be really firm about our relationships with Turkey. The migration issue has caused huge fears, some of them very justified, others not at all, but it has caused huge fears. I was in Washington last week for a few days, and I have to say the language and words in the Republican campaign resonate very well with what's happened in the United Kingdom. And I say that not to dismiss these things. I think we have to listen very carefully to what is being said from these movements that are not led by people who are disadvantaged. And this is the extraordinary part for me of this story, that while it speaks to the emotions of those who have been left behind economically and socially and in many ways feel that they're being overcome by global issues which are impacting in their towns and villages, it is led by people who are anything but disadvantaged. They're quite privileged, but they have motivated and activated a core sense of unease across the population. And I bet if I asked for hands up here, who feels comfortable about the way we are today, I don't think many would put up their hands, because we have come through such uncertainty. And the economic crisis has been part of that story, and I think it lingers, and the impact of the economic crisis lingers hugely in what has happened to date. There's a bit of plagiarism going on, as you know, across the waters, by a woman who wants to be First Lady, and I'm not saying there's any resonance here, and I was going to plagiarise Brendan's speech from May to the IIEA, where you predicted very clearly. Some of it was a tiny bit out, but 99% of it was accurate about what would happen in the referendum in the United Kingdom. I think what's less clear is what happens next. So I think one thing that's helpful is that we do not have a very divisive campaign for who will lead the Conservative Party. That deed is done. And I dare say there were many, many conversations about what would be good for both the Conservative Party and the United Kingdom, that there would not be a divisive campaign. My greatest fear was that we would have two candidates who would become and want to be more Brexiteer than the next, and that would not help relationships within the European Union and with the United Kingdom. So we have clarity on the political leadership. We have clarity on the narrative from the Prime Minister. She is determined to carry out the wishes of the vote as expressed in the referendum. But that's all we have clarity on. And I think, and I detect, there's no rush to press the exit button to trigger Article 50, because there is no plan. And there's also, in a way, a caveat that she has thrown into the equation, where she is saying that she wants to bring all of the parties that make up the United Kingdom with her, if you like, on this journey. So that's why the visit to Scotland was significant, although the, if you like, the reporting of the outcome divided, I think, the two people who were in the meeting, which can often happen. But certainly the Scottish First Minister has been very strong in her view that her people want to stay in the European Union. I would have liked to have seen the Prime Minister come to Northern Ireland. I think it would have been a really important signal. And I'm hugely disappointed that that did not happen. I have to say I represent this constituency of Midlands North West. It is 15 counties. But on the moment that the outcome of the referendum was clear, I've had so many phone calls, not just from business, and that's clearly a big issue in trade, but communities, voluntary groups, people who work in Louth County Council who live in Uri. You would not imagine the amount of people that are impacted by the uncertainties that have been created. And clearly our wish on this island is that there will be no change in what we have today, in the freedom to move. I live very close to the border, and I recall being a child and being stopped, my parents being stopped in checks and all that, and I do not want, and I don't think anyone in this room wants to see a return to those days. But clearly if there's a cold and crude Brexit, that's what we might be looking at and for. And that's why I think it would have been very helpful if the Prime Minister, Theresa May, had come to Northern Ireland, perhaps first, and united on this issue. Because the Taoiseach made his comments here on Sunday. And I have to say that when I talk to people in my constituency, I detect there's something happening. Let's just put it that way, in the mindset of people in the Republic of Ireland about this relationship that will change with Northern Ireland, and we don't want it to change for the worst because we have too much invested in this. And I'd say that the European Union itself has far too much invested in the peace process on this island for them to want to walk away, or indeed to have all that investment come to nothing. And those who say that the Irish issues are not fully understood, I think in the Parliament in particular, they are very well understood. You mentioned the EPP group that I sit with. Well, we have had a working group on this UK question for a long period before the referendum, and its work continues today and will into the future. And I hope they come, and I'm going to invite my colleagues to come to Ireland, North and South, and join with others to listen to what is the worries of people on all sectors, not just the trade and the business, although that is absolutely hugely important. I mean, Boris got honourable mention in the introduction here. I was just thinking out loud, given what has happened in Nice, the horror of Nice, given what is happening in Turkey, the idea that the United Kingdom, and they voted and we respect that, believe that it is easier to have a coordinated foreign affairs approach from Europe, if you like, without the institutions of the European Union, it does beggar belief. Because there he was at this meeting on Monday, access to all of his counterparts on one occasion and able to discuss the issues. The future for that relationship, when there is a cut between the United Kingdom and the European Union, will have to happen intergovernmentally. So the air miles will increase. The difficulties of having coordination will increase. And I think the United Kingdom has yet to spell out how they are squaring this idea of staying within Europe but pulling away from the European Union. I think that is not fully explained, and perhaps it's not even fully understood. I neglected to mention one issue which I think gets too little attention in the debate about the shifts in public opinion and this sense of dissatisfaction and disaffection that is clearly in many societies, and that is technology. When Schuman and his colleagues and the great founders of the European Union were dreaming these ideas, I wonder if Twitter and Facebook existed, would there be a European Union? I expect not. Because in today's world, there is no private or quiet space for people to think. And I mean think deeply and discuss in confidence, not in secret. Because I think this idea might give the wrong signal that I don't want openness and transparency. I'm all for it. But I do think there needs, and politicians have got to look at this in a very serious way, that sometimes silence and reflection gives you a better outcome in terms of policy than constant communicating and telling everybody not just what I think, but what I've eaten while I was thinking. And I mean, it's a funny point, but I think that is a very, very crucial issue in where we are today. Because we are all now, I could look at and did the excerpts from this very summer school as I drove here last night. I wasn't driving, by the way, so I was watching it, just for clarification. So we know what's happening everywhere, all the time. I'm watching things at the Republican convention, not now as I speak to you, but I'm eyes and ears to everything. And I think in that space where technology is wonderful, but it also makes policy making and leadership much tougher. If I insult somebody, which I try not to do, publicly at least, but if you do that publicly, and we saw a lot of this in the debate in the United Kingdom, you get oxygen, you get publicity, and Joe, you come from a media background as I do too. So when I see in the European Parliament, and I chair the sessions, and I see the polarisation and the sundering of the centre, and that is what is happening, it is because if you have very definitive, hardline views, you will get coverage because your message is so clear. So vote to leave, you get independence. It's a wonderful message. If you're more nuanced, as perhaps this panel might be, and you have time to listen, you can reflect on, well, you'll agree with some things and you'll disagree with others. But in media time, that isn't possible anymore. And I don't think that mainstream parties have actually taken up that challenge. And that may be part of why Europe gets a bad press. And I'll mention one piece of bad press. I was listening to our national broadcaster at the weekend, and somebody said, sure, for God's sake, they're even telling us what kettles we have to use. And I think the two bits there are they are telling us what to do. And when in fact that is all about a good proposal around eco-design and energy efficiency. But my piece of the story is a bit dull. The other one is much more effective. But if those issues continue to be told in that way, it is little, if you like, surprise that we've had the vote that's happened in the United Kingdom. If you look now to what lies ahead, I think that normality, if you like, has been restored to some extent. Yesterday we had an extraordinary meeting of the Agriculture Committee. Commissioner Hogan was there. He announced a plan for a crisis in the dairy sector in particular, and there was participation from 3 MEPs from the United Kingdom. And it sounded very much like business as usual. So that is going on, while at the same time the Parliament, particularly the Parliament where I sit, is looking at its role in this exit process. And the word consent is linked to our role here, but I think the Parliament will be crucial in this. As it would have been crucial had there been a vote to remain, and the deal that David Cameron struck would have to go through the rigours of the Parliament. And I can say to you that many of my colleagues would not have voted in favour of that, because they would be asked to do things that were against the interests and the free movement of their citizens. So the Parliament will hold very dearly to the principles, the core principles of the European Union. And if anything, I think the vote by the United Kingdom has removed that question mark over where will the UK be. So it's clear now where the UK will be. And it's also allowed the rest, if you like, of the 27 member states within the Parliament to say, where do we want to be? And frankly, let's park all the issues that are problematic. But at its core, where most and the majority still would hold, is there's a very strong belief that in a world where everything is so close and global, that the idea of not working together in this format is just unthinkable. And that the results of a disintegration would be very, very, very horrendous for individual member states and for our citizens. But we have to convince people of that. And I think that that is our job now, and certainly it's something that I take very seriously. This is a big constituency, for example. I don't get around it every single week, but I get to parts of it. And I think we have to listen very carefully and also talk to people in the smaller gatherings about what Europe is about, and that it isn't an us and them, which perhaps we have allowed big create. It is more about us and what the values are that are at the core of the European Union. But I suppose the problem with values are, you know, as people would say, they don't impact me and how I live, and therefore we do have to talk to the core problems that people face in their lives. And many of the problems they face are not caused, if you like, by Europe, some may well be, but many are within the member states themselves, remit to cure. Indeed, we know that in our own country here. I would say that in my time in the Parliament, I have been hugely disappointed about how, if you like, national parliaments, not just here Dáil Éireann, link with the European Parliament. I think there is a need for a sea change in that relationship. I think national parliaments need to make more time and space for the European Union, not just to reject proposals that come their way, but to talk to us about what might be good ideas that we could work together on and shape our future on. And that space is not really there at the moment. We have structures, but I don't think there's real engagement. I happen to be the Parliament's representative at the Speakers' Conference of all 28 member states in Luxembourg recently, and I was profoundly hit by this feeling that many in the room, and these were and indeed our own Cathaoirleach was there of Dáil Éireann, had a suspicion not just of the European Union, but certainly the role of the European Parliament. And I think we have to get over this idea that just because the Parliament has power, that it diminishes the power of national parliaments. I would have thought that if we work well together, that there is a greater synergy and we can be more effective. And it surprises me that with all of the technologies that I've referenced, that we haven't managed that relationship more effectively. But it is something that we are talking about in our group, and I think it is something that's absolutely going to have to be done. I mean, I was reminded just on the media side of Brendan Keenan, a former colleague of mine in The Independent. I think he wrote relatively recently about how does the media cover the European Parliament, and because he said it was as important as Dáil Éireann. And I think we get reasonable coverage on occasion, as it might be deserved, but perhaps we need a deeper look ourselves within the Parliament, and I'm responsible for DG Communication, as to how we might assist ourselves in talking to people about what the Parliament does, its role and function, particularly now in these times where we have one large member state about to leave. When I say that, though, I do believe they will go, but part of me wonders how. I have tried really hard to analyse those issues where we will need to have an agreement on. And every time I find one or two or three, they multiply into dozens. And the complications of a relationship of 43 years standing, I mean, the roots go very deep. And I think to think that they will be uprooted within a 2-year period and with great ease is overly optimistic. I think it's fascinating that the United Kingdom now have a department of exiting the European Union. I don't know if there's a lifespan put on that or if it will be prolonged, but it's interesting that the focus now within the United Kingdom is on its relationship as we leave, and I think we need to look at the relationship as we go forward. And from the perspective of Ireland, I do think we have a lot of work to do to keep our concerns on the agenda. They're known, but in this complex set of negotiations that will follow, I do think we will have to continue to press our concerns. We will have, and you'll hear from other speakers here, the only land border. I think we understand the psychology of the United Kingdom. We have very strong movement of peoples, of goods and services, and those things really do need to be fully protected. But how? Because there are red lines all over the page from both sides. And the fundamental red line for the European Union is freedom of movement. And that, tragically, is a fundamental double red line on the side of the United Kingdom. So it's going to take huge wisdom and understanding to see how we can chart a course, perhaps not based on existing models of relationships with countries and the European Union today, but perhaps there is another way. But I don't think the United Kingdom see that yet. And I detect, as I said, an unwillingness for them to trigger early or soon. But I also know that within the Council and indeed the Parliament, there is a desire to know what the time frame is so that we also can plan our business and how we do things. So what are the issues that Europe needs to do better? And I've had a conversation with somebody who was saying about we need more Europe. And I think when I say that, people recoil a little because they sense that more is just more, perhaps, bureaucracy or more of what we don't want. Well, when you say we want a better Europe, a Europe that understands where people are, that sorts out the banking issues, the legacy issues that are still there, that gets the economies going again. Because I don't think these conversations we're having today would be as difficult if there was strong economic growth. So I think there are many, many issues that Europe and the Member States need to work at very closely. But for me, the biggest challenges are the geopolitical ones. And they're hard to get traction on. So I was quite pleased that our chairman did that this morning. That the idea of, I mentioned Turkey and Russia's been mentioned, and China and our relationships with the US, that if we neglect those, I think there are hugely serious consequences for the continent of Europe and for the European Union itself. I also would say that the idea of disintegration, you could say it's begun already, but it doesn't have to continue. But remember, there are elections coming up in other member states, some of the older member states. I'm thinking of France. There's a referendum coming up in Hungary. There are many countries who don't quite like the way Europe is today, but they don't agree on the way forward. So I think there's a real challenge to leadership, to prime ministers and heads of government, to be much more frank about what the options are. So if we just go for intergovernmentalism, which the Parliament will not accept, because we are elected by the people and we therefore have to reflect what we believe our citizens want, and I don't think they want one picking off the other, then there is a challenge for the European Union of 27 to deal with more effectively and more rapidly the things that people are concerned about. And it's not kettles, I have to say. It's economics, it's youth unemployment in particular, while also dealing with those big global challenges, including climate change, which I have not mentioned. So my summation of where we're at today is there's a new normal. We are certain about the uncertainties, if that's not a strange way to put it. We do not know the timeline, though we do know that the United Kingdom will not take up the mantle of President of the Council in 2017. I think they've clarified that in recent hours. There are elections to the European Parliament in 2019. If this is not all resolved by then, what happens? Will there be elections from the United Kingdom? I would think probably not. Although I have to say, and I think it's important, that the United Kingdom colleagues that I worked with on many issues are extremely effective and able people. And there's been a lot of talk about bureaucrats. I think being a bureaucrat is almost worse than a politician, particularly if you're a Brussels bureaucrat. But you would not believe the devastation, psychologically, on the civil servants in the Parliament that are from the United Kingdom, particularly the younger ones. It's been quite devastating for them because they see that something they work with and for will now, and they indeed might be impacted by it. So don't underestimate the psychological impact on the European Union, but don't underestimate the ability of the European Union to get through this. I have to say, I thought at times in the Parliament when the economic crisis was at its worst, I thought then Europe was really threatened. I felt that the solidarity which used to be at its core was not working effectively and indeed needs to be rebuilt. The fact that we've come through that, not fully intact as we know now, but that we've come through it, points to me to an inner strength within the European Union, which I think has been reinvigorated because of Brexit, to actually not allow disintegration to happen. But my last word is this. If we allow the status quo, if we just keep doing what we're doing, then I think we will get disintegration by accident, not design. But it's our challenge, those of us in politics and in civil society, and I think we have to work very closely with civil society, to talk about the value of revival and renewal. And I think Ireland can be the strongest voice around the table in that. In my view, we became more independent and strong when we joined Europe. The idea of a large country believing they're more independent and strong by leaving, frankly, I don't get that. But then we live in very fascinating and uncertain times. Thank you.